The great throne room of the Valorian Empire stretched endlessly before Commander Marcus Cole as he walked forward with steady steps. And every alien eye in that massive hall watched him with a mixture of curiosity and contempt that he could feel pressing against his skin like cold water. He was just a human after all, a member of a species that the galaxy had only discovered 5 years ago. And in the eyes of these ancient beings, he was nothing more than a primitive creature from a small blue world that had barely learned to travel beyond its own moon. Empress Silthery sat upon her throne of living crystal, and her beauty was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen in his 38 years of life. For her skin glowed with a soft silver light, and her eyes held the deep purple color of distant nebulas, while her tall, elegant form radiated power that seemed to bend the very air around her. She was over 3,000 years old, the ruler of an empire that spanned 100 star systems. And she possessed telepathic abilities that could crush the mind of any lesser being with a single thought. And today she would become his wife. Marcus kept his face calm as whispers filled the throne room, and he could guess what they were saying even without understanding their musical language, because the meaning was clear in their mocking smiles and dismissive glances. Why would the Empress lower herself to marry such a creature? They wondered. And the answer was simple: politics. The Korax Dominion had wanted Earth, had wanted to claim humanity as slaves and strip their planet of resources. And the only thing standing between Earth and total conquest was this marriage alliance with the Valorian Empire. So Marcus had volunteered when Earth's leaders asked for someone to make this sacrifice. Not because he wanted glory or power, but because he had spent 20 years fighting to protect his home, and this was simply another mission. The grand ceremony passed in a blur of alien rituals that Marcus performed with careful precision. And when it was done, Empress Silthery looked at him for the first time with something other than cold indifference. "You may speak," she said, and her voice rang through the hall like silver bells. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Marcus replied in a quiet, steady tone. "I know this marriage is not what you would have chosen. I know this marriage is not what you would have chosen. But I promise to bring no shame to your throne." A ripple of amused laughter spread through the watching nobles, and one tall, Etherean lord spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "Listen to the pet speak. How charming that it knows words." Marcus did not react to the insult, keeping his expression neutral as he had learned to do through years of military service. But he noticed something interesting in that moment. Empress Silthery frowned at the lord who had spoken, and there was a flicker of something in her purple eyes that might have been disapproval. The weeks that followed were difficult for Marcus as he settled into his new life in the imperial palace. And everywhere he went, he faced the same treatment from the Valorian court. They called him pet and primitive and amusing little creature, and they spoke about him as if he could not understand, even though he spent every night learning their language with desperate determination. His quarters were beautiful but isolated, a suite of rooms in a distant wing of the palace where he would not embarrass the Empress with his presence. And most days passed without him seeing another living soul except for the servants who brought his meals. But Marcus used this time well, studying everything he could find about Valorian history and culture and politics. And his military mind began to map the power structures of the court like he was planning a campaign. The Empress summoned him occasionally for formal events where she needed to display her human consort. And during these appearances, Marcus noticed that she watched him with growing curiosity. One evening after a particularly long diplomatic reception, she asked him to walk with her in the palace gardens. And as they moved through groves of glowing trees, she finally spoke what was on her mind. "You are strange for a human," she said. "My advisors told me your species has loud, unshielded minds that broadcast every thought like screaming children. But when I reach toward your mind, I find nothing but silence." Marcus considered his answer carefully before responding. "Perhaps I am simply not very interesting." "Your Majesty." "No," she said slowly. "That is not it at all. There's something different about you, Commander Cole. Something my telepathy cannot touch. And I find myself wondering what secrets hide behind those quiet eyes of yours." Before Marcus could respond, a sound reached his ears that made every combat instinct in his body snap to full alert. And he moved without thinking. His hand shot out and grabbed the Empress around her waist, pulling her behind him as a blade of pure energy sliced through the air where she had been standing. Just a heartbeat before, the assassin emerged from the shadows of the garden, a cloaked figure with 4 arms, each holding a weapon, and it lunged toward them with terrible speed. But Marcus was faster. He stepped forward to meet the attack, and his hands moved in patterns that his body remembered from training he could never speak about. And in 3 seconds, the assassin lay broken on the ground while Marcus stood over it without even breathing hard. The palace guards arrived moments later, surrounding the scene with weapons drawn, and Empress Silthery stared at her human husband with an expression of pure shock. "How did you do that?" she whispered. "That was a Korax shadow killer, one of their deadliest agents. And you defeated it with your bare hands in seconds." Marcus turned to look at her, and for just an instant something flickered behind his eyes. Something old and vast and powerful that made even the ancient Empress feel small. Then it was gone, and he was just a tired soldier again. "I told you." "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "I spent 20 years protecting my home, and old habits are hard to break." But as the guards took away the body and the palace erupted into chaos around them, Silthery could not stop thinking about what she had seen in that single moment. There had been golden light in his eyes, light that did not belong to any human. And she realized with a chill that ran down her spine that she had married something far more dangerous and mysterious than a simple soldier from Earth. The human called Marcus Cole was hiding something. And for the first time in 3,000 years, Empress Silthery felt genuine fear mixed with a curiosity that would not let her rest until she discovered the truth. 6 months had passed since the assassination attempt in the garden. And in that time, everything had changed between Marcus Cole and Empress Silthery. Once she had ignored him except for formal occasions. Now she found herself seeking his company in ways that surprised her own ancient heart. And she told herself it was only because she wanted to understand the mystery he represented. They began taking meals together in her private chambers. And during these quiet hours, Marcus shared stories about Earth that fascinated the Empress more than she wanted to admit. He told her about the great wars that had shaped human history, about the terrible weapons they had built and the millions who had died, but also about the moments of kindness and sacrifice that had saved their species from destroying itself. "Your people are violent," Silthery observed one evening as they sat by a window overlooking the glowing capital city below. "Yes," Marcus agreed without shame. "We have done terrible things to each other, but we have also learned from those mistakes and grown stronger because of them. The Etherian people left violence behind over 10,000 years ago," the Empress said. "We evolved beyond such primitive impulses." Marcus smiled slightly at her words, and there was something knowing in that expression that made Silthery feel strangely defensive, with respect. "Your Majesty, you did not leave violence behind. You simply became so powerful that no one dared challenge you anymore. And that is not the same thing as peace." The Empress wanted to argue but found that she could not, because deep down she knew he was speaking truth that her own advisors would never dare to voice. As the weeks continued, Marcus proved himself to be far more than the primitive creature the court believed him to be, and his ability to learn was almost frightening in its speed. Within 3 months, he spoke the Valorian language fluently, and within 5 months, he had memorized the complete history of the Empire, going back 20,000 years. He asked questions that revealed a sharp tactical mind, and his observations about Valorian politics showed an understanding that matched advisors who had served the throne for centuries. "How do you learn so quickly?" Silthry asked him one day when he correctly predicted the outcome of a complex trade negotiation before it even happened. "Humans have short lives," Marcus replied, "so we learn to think fast and adapt faster. It is the only way our species survived long enough to reach the stars." The Empress found herself thinking about his words long after he had gone, and she began to see humanity differently than she had before. They were not primitive, she realized. They were simply young, and their youth gave them a fire and hunger that her own ancient people had lost somewhere in the long millennia. Meanwhile, the court continued to treat Marcus with barely hidden contempt, but he bore their insults with quiet dignity that impressed Silthry more than any display of anger could. As she began to feel protective of him, which confused her deeply because she was the ruler of an empire, and he was supposed to be nothing more than a political tool. One night she found him alone in the palace library, surrounded by ancient texts that even Valorian scholars struggled to read. "Those documents are written in Old High Etherean," she said in surprise, "a language that died out 8,000 years ago." "I know," Marcus said without looking up. "I have been teaching myself from the grammar texts in the historical section. That should take decades of study. I suppose I'm a fast learner." Silthry sat down across from him and studied his face in the soft light of the reading lamps. And she realized that she had grown to care for this strange, quiet human in ways she had not expected. "Marcus," she said, using his first name for the first time since their wedding, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." He finally looked up, and his gray eyes met her purple ones with calm patience. "Ask. My advisors have been investigating your past, and they have found things that do not make sense. Years of your life that are completely blank. Missions that were erased from military records, and whispers of something called Project Prometheus that no one will explain." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was gentle but firm. "Some doors are better left closed." "Your Majesty, that is not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It is a request. I am not ready to open those doors yet, and I am asking you to trust me enough to wait." Silthry should have demanded answers because she was the Empress and no one denied her anything. But instead she found herself nodding slowly. "Very well, I will wait. But one day you will tell me everything." "One day," Marcus promised. "When the time is right." They sat together in comfortable silence after that, and Silthry realized that somewhere along the way this political marriage had become something real. She cared about Marcus not because of what he could do for her empire, but because of who he was. A kind and patient man who treated her not as a two-ends goddess to be feared, but as a person to be known. That same night, one of her oldest advisors came to her with a report that made her blood run. "Cold Majesty," the advisor said with trembling voice. "One of our historians has been studying human mythology as you requested, trying to understand their culture better. And what has he found? Legends, Majesty. Ancient stories that humans told for thousands of years about beings who walked among them. Beings of terrible power who were definitely not human." Silthry leaned forward on her throne with narrowed eyes. "What kind of beings?" They had many names across different human cultures. Gods and angels and demons, creatures of light and fire who could reshape reality with their will. And the humans believed these beings watched over them and sometimes chose champions to carry their power. "Myths," Silthry said dismissively. "Every primitive species has such stories. That is what I thought as well, Majesty, but then I found something strange. The humans have a genetic marker that appears in roughly 1 out of every 10 million births. A marker that our scientists cannot explain because it does not match any natural evolution. What are you saying? The advisor swallowed hard before continuing. I am saying that the legends may not be legends at all. Majesty, I am saying that something may have touched humanity long ago. Something powerful, beyond our understanding. And I am saying that your husband Marcus Cole carries that genetic marker. Silvery sat in stunned silence as the weight of those words settled over her. And she thought about the golden light she had seen in his eyes. The night of the assassination attempt, she thought about his impossible learning speed and his mind that her telepathy could not touch, and the way he had defeated a Korak shadow killer with his bare hands in seconds. What have I married? She whispered. Into the empty throne room, and somewhere deep in the palace Marcus Cole sat alone with ancient texts before him. And if anyone had been watching, they might have seen his eyes glow with soft golden light for just a moment before fading back to ordinary gray. The warning sirens woke Empress Silthery from a deep sleep. And within minutes, she was in the war room surrounded by her admirals and generals as terrible news poured in from the borders of her empire. The Korak's Dominion had launched a massive surprise attack against Ethon Prime, one of the most important colony worlds in Valorian space. And the reports were devastating. Hundreds of warships had appeared from hyperspace without warning, and they had begun bombarding the planet before the local defense fleet could even respond. And already thousands of innocent civilians had died in the flames. How did they get so close without our sensors detecting them? Silthery demanded, her voice sharp with anger and fear. They used a new type of stealth technology. Majesty, her chief admiral replied with a pale face. Our early warning systems never saw them coming. What forces do we have in the region? The Third Fleet was stationed nearby and has already engaged the enemy. But they are outnumbered 5-1 and taking heavy losses. Silthery closed her eyes for a moment as she processed the information. And when she opened them again, her expression was hard as stone. Mobilize every available fleet and send them to Ethon Prime immediately. We will crush this invasion and make the Koraks pay for their treachery. There is more. Majesty, the Admiral said in a voice that trembled slightly. Our scouts have detected a planet-killer weapon among the Koraks fleet. A graviton collapser capable of destroying the entire planet by crushing its core. HFY. Cold silence fell over the war room as everyone understood what that meant. Even if the Valorian fleet arrived in time to win the battle, the Koraks could simply destroy the planet and kill every living thing on its surface out of spite. How long until we can reach them? Silthery asked. 18 hours at maximum speed. Majesty, and how long can our forces on Ethon Prime hold out? Perhaps 12 hours. Perhaps less. The Empress stood frozen as the terrible math became clear in her mind. And for the first time in her 3,000 years of life, she felt truly helpless. That was when Marcus entered the war room. And every eye turned to watch the human consort approach the throne with steady steps. I am coming with the fleet, he said simply. No, Silthery replied immediately. Absolutely not. Your Majesty, you are not a soldier anymore, Marcus. You are my husband. And I will not send you into a battle that we may not win. Marcus looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. A mixture of sorrow and resolve, and something that almost looked like an apology. Silvery, he said, using her name without her title for the first time ever. Your people are dying. Thousands more will die in the hours to come. And I cannot sit safely in this palace while that happens. There is nothing you can do that our warships cannot. You do not know that, Marcus said quietly. And neither do I, but I have to try. I forbid it. Marcus took a step closer and lowered his voice so that only she could hear his next words. I was never just a soldier. Silthery, I told you there were doors I was not ready to open. But those doors exist because what lies behind them is dangerous. And right now, dangerous is exactly what your empire needs. The Empress stared into his gray eyes and remembered all the strange things she had noticed about him over the past year. The impossible learning speed and the mental silence and the golden light she had glimpsed during the assassination attempt. "What are you?" she whispered. "I do not fully understand it myself," Marcus admitted, "but something lives inside me. Something ancient and powerful that has been sleeping for a very long time. And I think Ethon Prime is going to wake it up." Before Silthery could respond, Marcus turned and walked out of the war room, and she found that she did not have the strength to call him back. The journey to Ethon Prime took 16 hours aboard the fastest ship in the Imperial fleet. And during that time, Marcus sat alone in a small cabin with his eyes closed and his mind turned inward. He had spent 20 years trying to ignore the presence that lived in the depths of his soul, the ancient thing that had chosen him as its vessel when he was just a child. And the government program called Project Prometheus had been designed to help him control it, but control was not the same as suppression. And Marcus had learned the hard way that the power inside him could not be contained forever. Now he reached toward it deliberately for the first time in decades, and he felt its stern response like a sleeping giant beginning to wake when the fleet dropped out of hyperspace above Ethon Prime. The situation was even worse than the reports had suggested. Veliorn ships burned in the void, broken and dying, while the massive Corax war fleet surrounded the planet like a swarm of metal locusts, and there in the center of it all hung the Graviton Collapser, a monstrous weapon already glowing with the terrible energy that would soon tear the planet apart. "All ships engage," the admiral commanding the relief fleet ordered. "Focus fire on that weapon. We must destroy it before it fires." The battle erupted in chaos as hundreds of warships clashed above the dying world, and laser fire and missiles filled the void with light and death. But the Corax had planned well, and their defensive formation around the Graviton Collapser was nearly impossible to break. Marcus watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the flagship and knew with cold certainty that they were going to lose. "I need a shuttle," he said to the captain. "What are you talking about?" "We are in the middle of a battle." "I know, and I need to get to that weapon." The captain stared at him like he was insane, but something in Marcus's eyes made the officer hesitate. "The Empress will have me executed if anything happens to you. The Empress will forgive you when I save her empire," Marcus replied. "Now get me that shuttle." Minutes later, a small transport craft launched from the flagship and dove straight toward the heart of the Corax formation. And it should have been destroyed within seconds, but Marcus sat in the pilot's seat with his eyes glowing soft gold. And somehow every missile missed, and every laser beam went wide as the shuttle slipped through defenses that should have been impenetrable. The Corax commander aboard the main warship saw the tiny human craft approaching and laughed at the absurdity of it. "One small shuttle thinks it can stop us," he said to his officers. "Let it land on the weapon. We will enjoy killing whoever is foolish enough to be aboard." The shuttle docked with the Graviton Collapser, and Marcus stepped out into a corridor filled with Corax soldiers, massive reptilian warriors armed with weapons designed to tear through armored vehicles. Their commander grinned with rows of sharp teeth as he approached the lone human. "You must be the pet that the Valorian Empress married," he said mockingly. "Did she send you here to beg for mercy?" Marcus looked at the alien commander with eyes that now blazed with pure golden light. And when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that did not belong to any human throat. "No," he said as reality itself began to bend around him. "She sent what sleeps inside the pet." Every psychic sensitive being in the star system suddenly screamed in pain as something ancient and terrible announced its awakening. And the Corax soldiers, who had been laughing moments before now, stared at the glowing human with expressions of pure, primal terror. The battle for Ethon Prime was about to change forever. The Corax soldiers opened fire with everything they had, and hundreds of energy blasts and projectiles flew toward Marcus Cole in a storm of death that should have reduced him to ashes in an instant. But the golden-eyed human simply raised one hand, and every single attack stopped in midair as if time itself had frozen around him. "What are you?" the Corax commander whispered in a voice thick with fear. "I am an answer," Marcus replied, and his voice echoed with power that made the metal walls of the corridor vibrate. "An answer to a question that the universe asked long before your species existed." He closed his raised hand into a fist, and every frozen projectile crumbled into dust that drifted harmlessly to the floor. Then he began to walk forward. Corax soldiers tried to run, but found that they could not move their bodies, held in place by an invisible force that no amount of strength could overcome. Marcus passed through them like a ghost walking through a graveyard, and as he moved deeper into the weapon station, his mind touched each frozen enemy and saw their memories and fears and dreams. He did not kill them. Instead, he simply turned off their consciousness one by one, dropping them into a deep sleep from which they would eventually wake unharmed, because the thing inside Marcus was not a monster. It was something far older and stranger, and it had learned long ago that death was rarely the best solution to any problem. Soldiers came as alarms screamed throughout the station, and Marcus dealt with each wave the same way, his golden light spreading through corridors and rooms like a sunrise that brought sleep instead of waking. Corax commander retreated toward the control room where the graviton collapser was being prepared to fire, and his hand shook as he opened communication channels to his fleet. "All ships focus fire on the weapon station," he ordered desperately. "Destroy it now. Destroy it with everything you have." "But Commander, you are still aboard." "I do not care. This thing must not be allowed to leave this station alive. Fire now." Outside in the void of space, dozens of Corax warships turned their weapons toward their own planet killer weapon. But before they could fire, something impossible happened. The human shuttle that had delivered Marcus to the station began to glow with the same golden light, and then it expanded, growing larger and brighter until it formed a shield of pure energy that surrounded the entire station. Every weapon that the Corax fleet fired splashed harmlessly against that golden barrier. And aboard the Valorian flagship, the sensors officer stared at her screens in disbelief. "Admiral, something is happening to the graviton collapser. I am reading energy signatures that do not match anything in our databases." "What kind of energy?" "I have no idea. But it is spreading, and it is protecting the station from the Corax attack on the bridge of the flagship Empress." Silvery watched through the view screen with tears streaming down her face, because she knew that the golden light could only mean one thing. Her husband had awakened whatever power he had been hiding, and now she could only watch and pray that he survived what came next. Inside the station, Marcus reached the control room and found the Corax commander standing before the graviton collapser's firing mechanism with a weapon pressed against his own head. "If you come any closer, I will kill myself," the commander said, "and my dead hand will trigger the weapon. You may be powerful, but you cannot stop to collapse once it begins." Marcus stopped and tilted his head slightly as golden light continued to pour from his eyes. "You would destroy an entire planet and kill yourself just to stop me," he said with something that sounded almost like sadness. "Your people truly have lost their way. We are the Corax Dominion," the commander spat. "We do not surrender to anyone, especially not to a pet from a primitive world." "I am not asking you to surrender," Marcus replied gently. "I am offering you a chance to understand." He reached out with his mind, not to attack but to share. And for a single overwhelming moment, the Corax commander experienced what Marcus experienced. He felt the weight of billions of years pressing down upon his consciousness, the memory of stars being born and dying, the echo of a purpose that had guided the universe since its very first moments, and he understood at last what he was facing. The bees Progenitors had been the first intelligent beings to arise in this universe, born in the fires of creation itself, and they had watched as countless species evolved and reached for the stars. Some of those species were kind and curious and full of wonder, while others were cruel and violent and hungry for conquest. And the progenitors had done what they could to guide the galaxy toward balance, but even they were not immortal. And as the eons passed, they began to fade from existence one by one. Before they disappeared completely, they had seeded dozens of worlds with the potential for life, hoping that new species would arise to carry on their work. And Earth had been their final and greatest creation. Humans were designed to be vessels, beings capable of carrying progenitor essence without being destroyed by its power. And in times of great need, that essence would awaken and act through its human host. Marcus Cole was the current vessel of the last remaining progenitor consciousness, a being of light and will that had watched over humanity since the very beginning. The Corax commander dropped his weapon and fell to his knees as the vision ended, and his eyes were wide with awe and terror. "I did not know," he whispered. "We did not know." "No," Marcus agreed. "But now you do. And you have a choice to make." "What choice?" "You can continue this war and be destroyed. Not by me, but by the consequences of your own actions. Or you can return to your people and tell them what you have seen. And perhaps your species can find a better path." The commander looked up at the glowing human who held power beyond anything the Corax had ever imagined. "And he made his decision?" "I will tell them," he said. "I will make them understand." Marcus nodded and turned toward the graviton collapser, reaching out with both hands as golden light blazed around him, brighter than a sun. The terrible weapon that had threatened to destroy an entire world began to shake and shimmer, and then it simply came apart, breaking down into its component atoms as Marcus unmade it piece by piece with nothing but his will outside. The Corax fleet suddenly received new orders from their commander. Orders to cease fire and retreat immediately. And within minutes, the massive invasion force was pulling back toward the hyperspace jump points. The Lorian fleet watched in stunned disbelief as their enemies fled without explanation. And then every sensor in the area went crazy as the golden shield around the station expanded one final time before fading away. Marcus stood alone in the empty control room as the light in his eyes slowly dimmed back to normal gray, and he felt the ancient presence inside him settle back into sleep. Satisfied that its work was done for now, his body was exhausted beyond anything he had ever experienced, and he barely managed to reach his shuttle before collapsing into the pilot's seat. But as he flew back toward the Valorian flagship, he smiled slightly, because Ethon Prime was safe and the Corax were retreating, and somewhere far away his wife was watching and finally understanding what she had married. The galaxy would never see humanity the same way again, and that was exactly as it should be. Back on the Valorian throne world, Empress Silthery watched the battle footage for the 100th time as her advisors argued about what it all meant. The being on that screen wore her husband's face, but it moved like a god of war and wielded power that made Valorian technology look like children's toys. "What do we do, Majesty?" her chief advisor asked nervously. Silthari was quiet for a long moment before she answered. "We wait," she said. "We wait for him to come home, and then we listen to whatever he has to tell us, because whatever Marcus Cole truly was, he was still the man she had grown to love over the past year. And she would not abandon him now simply because she had learned his secret. The universe had just gotten much stranger. But Silthery was the empress of an empire that had lasted 20,000 years. And she would face this new reality with the same strength her ancestors had shown, even if that reality included the fact that she had somehow married a vessel of the gods. Marcus Cole returned to the Imperial Palace 3 days after the Battle of Ethon Prime, and as his shuttle descended through the golden clouds of the throne world, he felt a strange mixture of relief and Fear relief, because the people he had sworn to protect were safe. And fear because he did not know how Silthery would react to learning the truth about what he really was. The landing platform was empty, except for a single figure standing in the morning light. And Marcus felt his heart ache when he recognized the silver glow of his wife's skin. He walked down the shuttle ramp on legs that still trembled with exhaustion. And he stopped a few feet away from her because he did not know if she would want him to come closer. "Silthery," he said quietly, "I should have told you. I did not know how, and I was afraid." She closed the distance between them before he could finish speaking, and her arms wrapped around him with a strength that surprised him. "You foolish, brave, impossible man," she whispered against his chest. "I watched you walk alone into the heart of an enemy fleet. I watched you become something beyond anything I've ever seen. And you think I would reject you for keeping secrets?" Marcus felt tears burning in his eyes as he held her back. And for a long moment they simply stood together on that platform as the sun rose over the alien city. "I am still me," he said eventually. "The thing inside me is not a separate being. It is part of who I am, like a memory that I carry from someone who lived a very long time ago." Silthery pulled back to look at his face, and her purple eyes searched his gray ones for any sign of the golden light she had seen in the battle footage. "Tell me everything," she said. "I am ready to hear it now." They walked together through the palace gardens as Marcus explained what he understood about his nature. And Silthery listened without interrupting, even when his words challenged everything she thought she knew about the universe. The progenitors had been the first children of creation, beings of pure consciousness that had emerged from the chaos at the beginning of time. And they had spent billions of years exploring the universe and learning its secrets, but they had known that they could not last forever, and so they had created successor species designed to carry on their work after they were gone. Most of those species had failed or evolved in unexpected directions. But humanity had been different. Humans were uniquely capable of merging with progenitor essence without losing their own identity, creating a partnership between ancient wisdom and youthful energy that was greater than either could be alone. The progenitor inside me chose my family line thousands of years ago, Marcus explained. It has passed from parent to child ever since, sleeping most of the time, but waking when it senses great need. And Project Prometheus, Silthery asked, was the government's attempt to understand and control what I am. They failed, of course, because you cannot control something that existed before stars had names. But they did teach me how to communicate with it better. They reached a quiet fountain in the deepest part of the gardens, and Silthery sat on the stone edge with her husband beside her. "Why did it wake for Ethon Prime?" she asked. "You have been in danger before, and it did not reveal itself." Marcus was quiet for a moment before answering. "Because I asked it to," he finally said. "For the first time in my life, I stopped fighting against it and instead asked for its help. And it answered, because protecting innocent lives is exactly the kind of purpose it was created for." Silthery nodded slowly as she absorbed this information. And then she asked the question that had been burning in her mind since she first watched the battle footage. What else does it know? What else can it do? Marcus turned to look at her with an expression that was suddenly very serious. "It knows that something is coming," he said. "Something from outside our galaxy. Something that the progenitors themselves fled from long ago. And it believes that this threat is why they created humanity in the first place. A threat to the entire galaxy, to multiple galaxies, perhaps to the universe itself, and it will arrive within the next few centuries." Silthery felt cold despite the warm sunlight around them, because she understood now why the progenitors had worked so hard to create successor species. They had not been building an empire or seeking immortality. They had been preparing an army for a war that had not yet begun. "What do we do?" she asked. "We grow stronger," Marcus replied. "We unite the species of this galaxy instead of fighting each other. We share knowledge and technology and prepare for what is coming. And we hope that when the enemy arrives, we will be ready. The months that followed changed everything. Word of what Marcus had done at Ethon Prime spread across the galaxy like wildfire. And suddenly, every spacefaring civilization wanted to know more about the strange humans from the small blue world called Earth. The Karax Dominion sent diplomats instead of warships, and their leader publicly apologized for the attack and requested an alliance with the Valorian Empire. Other empires followed, drawn not by fear of Marcus's power, but by hope that humanity might help them face whatever threats lay ahead. And on Earth itself, people who had once felt small and insignificant in the vast galaxy began to realize that they might be more important than anyone had ever imagined. Silthary announced the formation of the Terran Valorian Covenant at a ceremony attended by representatives from 100 different species. And as she spoke about cooperation and shared destiny, her human husband stood beside her looking slightly uncomfortable with all the attention. "You do not like being famous," she whispered to him between diplomatic greetings. "I was a soldier," Marcus replied. "We prefer to do our jobs and go home without anyone making a fuss about it. Too late for that now. You saved an entire planet and revealed that humanity carries the power of ancient gods. People are going to make a fuss. Wonderful." That night, after the ceremonies were over and the diplomats had returned to their ships, Marcus and Silthary stood together on the balcony of her private chambers, looking up at the star-filled sky. "I married you to protect your world," Silthary said softly. "I never expected to actually fall in love with you." Marcus smiled and took her hand in his. "I volunteered for this mission because I thought it was my duty," he replied. "I never expected to find someone who would look at me and see the man instead of the monster. You are not a monster. You are something extraordinary, and I am honored to stand beside you as we face whatever comes next." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, and then Silthary asked one more question. "The progenitor inside you, does it approve of me?" Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them there was just a hint of golden light mixing with the gray. "It thinks you are the bravest and most remarkable being it has encountered in the last 10,000 years," he said with a slight smile. "And it hopes that our children will inherit the best qualities of both our species." Silthary laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the balcony. "Children? We have not even discussed children yet. I know. But apparently ancient cosmic entities like to plan ahead." They laughed together as the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the depths of space, the first scouts of the coming darkness detected the golden light that had blazed at Ethon Prime, the enemy that the progenitors had fled from so long ago. Had finally noticed that someone in this galaxy was preparing to fight back. And they were not pleased, but that was a battle for another day. For now, Marcus Cole and Empress Silthary simply held each other and enjoyed the peace they had earned. Two beings from vastly different worlds who had found something precious in each other. The galaxy was changing. Humanity was rising to take its place among the stars. And a new chapter in the history of the universe was about to begin. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, because that was what partners did. And as the first light of dawn began to color the sky, Marcus felt the ancient presence inside him stir with something that might have been satisfaction. The plan that had begun billions of years ago was finally coming together, and humanity would be ready when the darkness came. The alien Queen had married a human soldier and discovered that she had gotten so much more than she ever expected, and Marcus Cole, vessel of the last progenitor, had finally found a home among the stars where he truly belonged.